Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. It's the 5th week of October. I'm Moon Ganyang, again joined by a wonderful panel of foreign journalists today. Welcome all to the program. The recent death of a high-profile K-pop star who had been a target of cyberbullying has triggered an outcry in Korea on the issue of cyber insults and online vitriol. On this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of foreign journalists to talk more about controversies surrounding cyberbullying. Now, on October 14th, singer and actress Sulli, former member of the K-pop girl group FX, took her own life. She was only 25 years old. Sulli was one of a growing number of singers and actors to have been targeted by vicious online vitriol. In the aftermath of her suicide, many have speculated online harassment may have played a factor in the young K-pop star's death. So what do you know about K-pop star Sulli's suicide and the difficult ordeals that she may have gone through prior to her suicide?
I mean, according to what I read in the Korean press, she was a victim of one of the worst online bullying in the history of K-pop industry, and it seems to have been very, very violent. You say she was a member of a K-pop group, and she started to date a rapper, and then she left the group and she started to put very natural picture of herself having fun on her Instagram, and somehow, for reason as a Westerner, I really have trouble to understand because that doesn't seem to be a big deal, but it seems to have triggered extremely violent insults, threats, and comments online, and that was extremely bad.
One thing that really sticks out to me, and a lot of people talk about this instance where she accidentally showed her chest on like an Instagram live video, but the criticism against her was so deep that, one time she took a picture wearing a Johnson & Johnson's baby oil sweatshirt, and she was accused of pedophilia or infantilizing herself or playing into inappropriate Lolita culture because it's a brand of baby oil meant for babies, and she wore a sweatshirt with that on. So I mean, the level of ridiculousness for the amount of criticism that she got was really something profound, I think, and it makes sense to make some connection between cyberbullying and perhaps maybe not a great mental
Right,
state.
and this was all done behind anonymity, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that she is challenging the preconceived idea of how to behave as a K-pop star. So I can guess that she was huge under pressure.
Definitely, she was under a lot of pressure as a K-pop star. Do you believe that these celebrities, public officials, or any other high-profile figures must come to acceptance with the fact that they will always be the target of malicious comments on cyberspace, or should they actually go out and sue these people?
Maybe both. I mean, I think it's important to grow a thick skin, but that doesn't mean that we have to accept online violence is still violence, and I don't think that's acceptable. I mean, what you suffer is definitely not acceptable. And I'm really angry by the fact that people are anonymous, and that makes them so brave. It's so easy to insult and threaten people hiding behind a pseudonym, and that makes me angry. I don't think it's acceptable.
Right. I just want to touch upon this. The definition of hate speech, for instance, differs slightly depending on each country and organization. What is the definition and boundaries of hate speech in your personal opinion?
In the United States, legally, it's often defined as threatening or negative language towards someone depending on a certain group that they belong to. So maybe a certain sexual orientation or race or gender, things like that. I actually pretty much agree with that definition. I mean, it's always hard to qualify what hate speech is, but it certainly isn't as simple as I hate you. It's usually something that shows prejudice towards someone, usually for things that they can't help, or speaking to greater like societal hierarchies and history of like oppressing different kinds of people. And I think that's a fair definition. The problem is always that when you're trying to prove that legally, it gets dicey.
I think to give a concrete example, if you keep saying to somebody, you're ugly, you're stupid, that doesn't constitute hate speech. But if you say you're ugly because of that person belongs to a certain group or a certain minority, that would qualify as hate speech.
Yeah, I agree with them. Yeah.
A 2018 report from South Korea's Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism revealed that 8 out of 10 South Koreans have been the victim of cyberbullying or any kind of hate remarks at least once in their lifetime. Now, also according to statistics from the Korea Communications Commissions, reports of hate remarks, which includes disparaging and prejudicial remarks, are rising with each passing year. Now, do you also feel that online hate comments or cyberbullying is becoming more prevalent here in Korea? I mean, if so, what do you think are some reasons that might be driving this forward?
We saw the rise of some websites like ilbe, very famous conservative website where people really seems to lash out and say like horrible things. And I think that creates a culture where there is no consequences. You realize that you can hide yourself behind a fake name, say horrible things, and a lot of people support you. So that creates a culture of impunity where you can do that over and over. And we saw ilbe do like terrible things. And it feels, I think online, it feels somehow virtual. Like people forget that the person they attack is a human being with a family, with suffering, and that sometimes the comments you receive, like people wouldn't say that to your face if you were meeting them face to face, but they hide themselves behind their screen, and that makes things easier.
Yeah. So when I came to Korea, I misunderstood that, comment is called as 댓글 in Korea. 댓글 means is composed of two meanings. One is response, the other is word. But I misunderstood that 댓글 should come from tackle.
Oh, tackle.
Tackle is a play which you put your body against your opponent in the rugby or
Like in rugby.
Soccer.
Yeah.
So because why I misunderstood, imagine that there should be much more aggressive comment in this country.
Oh,
Yeah.
so
of
based
course it
on
is my prejudice.
right. So
Yeah.
based on your readings of those remarks,
Yeah.
you understood that as tackles.
Yeah, tackle should come from tackle.
Oh,
which
that's
is
how
very,
aggressive they
yeah,
were.
which is very aggressive.
None of them were supportive.
Yeah.
Well, that says a lot about the nature of these remarks that are online, right?
But you see something very surprising. These days there is this movie, Kim Ji-young, born in 1980. And even before the movie was released, you already had people who said online they hated it. And once again, the level of violence you could see, these comments, I think there is more violent than there used to be. And I don't remember, I've been here for a long time, and I don't remember initially in the first stage when we saw the first social networks in Korea, this violence seems getting worse and worse.
Because I feel they're called keyboard warriors, if you will. I mean, with the rise of the internet and more things going online, it feels like more things are going more violent, and it seems like humanity is being lost somewhere there. Now, according to a 2017 report from the National Human Rights Commission, 9 out of 10 sexual minorities and 8 out of 10 women said that they were the victims of online hate remarks. Some online perpetrators have even attacked mothers, pregnant women, and senior citizens with malicious comments. Now, who are the main perpetrators of of these hate remarks, as well as the targets of hate remarks back home in your respective countries? I mean, who are those attacking and who are those being targeted?
I would argue that pretty much everyone has probably been targeted for some reason. In the US, I think the latest numbers suggest that around 36% of people have said that they've experienced cyberbullying who were surveyed by this research institute. And I would imagine it's much higher than that. But I would, if we want to get to what groups are doing it or are facing it the most, it would probably be like Korea, where it's sexual minorities, people of color, people who are kind of just marginalized groups getting a lot of the hate woman. And in terms of who's sending out that hate speech, I also think probably every demographic is guilty, but you have to think about what demographics are inherently against these groups, right? So in terms of really bad online comment and even hate speech online, I would imagine a lot of it comes from the opponents of these very vulnerable populations.
But do you think it's also a possibility that those attacking on cyberspace are those who do not have as much power in real life, offline?
Not necessarily. No? I mean, in France, a very recent poll showed that 27% of 18 to 25 years said they were victim of cyberbullying. I couldn't find any figures about like who are the perpetrators. A huge case recently, the huge scandal broke in France. There was this group of kind of powerful white men who they call themselves the LOL League, and they were attacking, like cyberbullying, a lot of women, other journalists. And these people are not discriminated, they are not poor, they are not...
they're not the marginalized.
They're not marginalized at all. They were just in a position where they could, and they did it. And it became a huge scandal, many victims came out, and many of them lost their job. But, I mean, that shows that it's not necessarily people at the margin of the society who are perpetrators.
Yeah, in Japan, so main target are ethnic minority, including Korean Japanese. So many people suddenly are radicalized on the net. Yeah, through the, so a lot of comment on them.
Right, which brings me to my next point. Recently, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government acknowledged that 2 far-right rallies targeting ethnic Koreans held in the city earlier this year was in violation of its anti-hate speech ordinance, which went into effect back in April. Now, Tetsuo, what are your thoughts on these actions taken by Tokyo Metropolitan Government? What was the main criteria used to determine that the rallies were a form of hate speech?
So unfortunately, the main criteria is not clear. Because Tokyo Metropolitan Government did not release the details. For example, the names of offenders, the names of organizations. Because the purpose of this making ordinance is not to punish people, just to educate and raise the awareness that hate speech will not be tolerable to Japanese residents. So that's the reason why criteria is not so clear.
How common is this anti-Korean sentiment in Japan?
Ordinary Japanese people are very kind. So
they're very kind,
Yeah,
yes.
they're very kind. But some part of Japanese who are radicalized on the net.
On the net.
Yeah, so they are called neto uyo. Net means internet. Uyo means right winger. Yeah, so a very small part of Japanese people.
Now, some critics say that the media is also playing a huge role in driving the surge in hate remarks or cyberbullying. Now, do you believe some forms of the media in Korea are also responsible for promoting discrimination, prejudice that could also lead to such hateful remarks on the internet, perhaps?
I mean, I think it's possible. It's always a question in media, not just in Korean media, of who you're going to give a voice to or what kind of cause or opinion you're going to give a platform to. So I certainly think there are times where maybe a really extremist small group in reality gets basically a soapbox to speak on by having an article about them or being quoted in the media. But I also think there's an issue with an absence of detail as well. For instance, I know a while back in Korean media, there were two cases that I saw that I found interesting. One was there was a video of a man who I believe is originally from the Middle East who was being harassed at a bus stop by an elderly Korean man. Hate motivation behind this, but the absence of looking into that I think is also problematic and maybe gives rise to hate speech in a greater context as well, right? By just treating it as any other singular crime. So I don't think it's a uniquely Korean issue.
Right.
And I don't think all Korean media is guilty of this.
Right, so just giving it airtime without any background information or giving it a narrative of any kind.
Also, I saw an article a couple of months ago about a bunch of high school boys beating up a half Russian, half Korean man, and it made me question, is there like a hate motivation behind this? But the absence of looking into that I think is also problematic and maybe gives rise to hate speech in a greater context as well, right? By just treating it as any other singular crime. So I don't think it's a uniquely Korean issue.
Right.
And I don't think all Korean media is guilty of this.
Right, so just giving it airtime without any background information or giving it a narrative of any kind. Now, following the Sulli's death and the subsequent controversy over hate remarks, the KCC chairman said he'll scrutinize relevant legal framework.
의도적인 허위 조작 정보 그리고 극단적인 혐오 표현 이런 부분들은 이 표현의 자유 보호 범위 밖에 있어서 규제의 대상이 돼야 되고.
Many other countries around the world have also introduced new laws and regulations governing cyberbullying. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, could you tell us about new laws or regulations introduced in your home countries regarding online hate remarks or hate speech? You know, have they been effective in stamping out online hate?
I mean, there is a brand new law in France voted this July about hate speech online. And the idea is that if you see some hate speech, you have to, on either a search engine like Google or a social network like Facebook or Instagram, the internet provider should make available a button or anything. There should be a way to tell the website that this is hate speech, and they have 24 hours to react. They have 24 hours either to delete it or to keep it. And if they don't comply, I think it's up to 1 year of jail, I mean, in the worst cases. So this law does not cover cyberbullying. And like the lawmakers know that it just covers the worst cases of hate speech, but it's still a beginning. And I think it goes in the right direction.
Right. At least it's a move forward in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, we don't have, from my understanding, a federal law that deals with cyberbullying, but 42 out of 50 states do have some kind of law that acknowledges a criminal form of cyberbullying. So, you know, the idea that you could be fined or go to jail for doing this. I know in the United States, most states also require school districts to have policies within the school system about this and how to deal with it internally when there's student-to-student cyberbullying. But I think we're still grappling with this in the United States a lot as well. And one case that's kind of all over national news and has been for years is this really unfortunate one out of Massachusetts involving Michelle Carter and this boy named Conrad Roy. And basically, it's incredibly complicated, so look it up at home. But basically, this young woman, around 17 years old, told her boyfriend to take his life, and he ultimately did. And she ultimately was held for involuntary manslaughter and got 2.5 years in prison and then reduced sentence. So this was a big watershed case in the United States because it was one of our first examples of online bullying turning into basically a jail sentence and a question of what are you responsible for when someone dies, arguably because of internet exchanges and things like this. And of course, dying by suicide, there's always questions of personal agency versus outside factors. So cases like this are happening. I think the social media platforms are also starting to grapple with this issue. There was an issue in YouTube where a famous YouTuber who is conservative was basically harassing a journalist at Vox who is gay and almost directing his following to send homophobic comments to this Vox journalist. And YouTube ultimately decided to demonetize that person's account, but not get rid of it, right? And so there's a lot of criticism there. So wherever the federal law is lacking, we're now asking the social media platforms to do something about it. And I think this is something we're going to have to grapple with for the next 5 years.
But then there's always the question of, is that enough? I mean, is demonetizing enough, you know? Right. In Korea, those who attack others in cyberspace with malicious comments can be punished according to local law, namely those pertaining to defamation and contempt. However, no legal provisions are currently available in South Korea regarding the prohibition of hate speech, hate remarks, and discrimination. Do you think the existing legal framework in Korea is enough to prevent hate comments or speech? Should there be revisions?
I remember reading articles in Korea about cyberbullying on KakaoTalk, when in the classroom, all the classmates would gather and attack one person on KakaoTalk. That makes, I think it's more difficult to regulate that it's not online. Nobody can see except the people who are part of that chat group on KakaoTalk. But I do think, to answer your question, that so far Korea, especially a country that's so advanced in terms of online culture as Korea, should have better rules and framework to prevent this increasing violence we can see online.
Right, and this trend I don't think is limited to Korea, but it seemed to be a really a prevailing trend in the world as well. So this lack of sensitivity is something that we need to raise awareness to. Now, amid the controversy over cyberbullying and online vitriol, some advocates are calling for the real name policy to be adopted. Now, this would require all users to use their real names rather than pseudonyms to leave comments online. South Korea has tried out the online real name policy back in 2007, only to abandon it in August 2012 after it was deemed unconstitutional.
이용자에게 본인 확인을 강제하는 것은 익명으로 표현할 자유를 지나치게 제한하는 것이어서 위헌이라는 것입니다.
What are your thoughts on the online name policy? Now, I mean, other than privacy threats, do you believe it could also have unintended consequences of, curtailing free speech if it were to be, reintroduced?
I think, the real name system is not so effective. So because people in front of the internet, people mindset is like this. So I'm right, so you are wrong. So this kind of mindset causes a lot of humiliation and a lot of hate speech. So I think before I said to you before, so education about media ethics, because we are living in an era that everybody can be a reporter, everybody can be a journalist. So the media ethics should be taught when we are in the elementary school or junior high school. So regulation, self-regulation is very important, but laws and some kind of external regulations has bring a limited result. This is my opinion.
Right. I mean, in the era of fourth industrial revolution, the importance of ethics, I think Tetsuo really nailed it there. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, I do think I'm in favor of real name. I mean, as a journalist, when you write something wrong, we write under our real names, and if we write something wrong, we suffer the consequences. And I think it's a bit sometimes when you get attacked by an army of nameless ghosts, who are completely, they benefit from impunity. And I don't think that's against free speech. You can still speak under your real name. Of course, you could say that, for example, if you work for a company and you're afraid of saying certain things, but that might affect your work, or maybe your boss won't like what you say. But I wonder what was the case before internet. I mean, people had opinions too, and I don't see why I think despite the obvious problem, I'm still in favor of real name system. I'm tired of what happened to Sulli once again. I mean, people killed her.
So if you could summarize today's discussion into a single headline, what would it be?
I guess the dire consequences of cyberbullying.
Absolutely. Tetsuo?
Do a fair play, not do aggressive tackle. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it would be short, like cyberbullying kills.
Kills. All right, that wraps up our discussion on hateful remarks and cyberbullying, but we will be back next week for another discussion on the latest issues making headlines, so do not forget to tune in then. Thank you for watching and goodbye.